Everybody in. Okay, we are live, Infinite Plane Radio, 4/24/2023. We're beginning a little early today. We're live on the audio feeds and on a few video channels. I just sent out notifications. Text alerts will resume soon. We had to cut back on a few things just out of necessity, but we're going to be reinstating the text alerts, which a lot of people find to be very useful. The title of the live stream today: MSM Purges Lemons, Tucker, Don Bongino, or is it Dan Bongino? I never really watched him. He's the guy who was supposed to have filled in for Rush Limbaugh. And I listen and I can tell when somebody's trying to cop someone else's style. And that's not a style you can imitate. But it's nothing surprises me here with these firings. Tucker participated in conversations about his own listeners, calling them cousin effers and terrorists, and not the good kind, or rather not the royalty that, or the Saudi Arabian terrorists that hit us on 9/11, but he said the cousin effers. Like, that's his take on his own listeners. Plus, he cost Fox News $787 million. What's the upside to keeping him? Then you have Don Lemon, fired over sexism. And I'm thinking, you know what? He should have transitioned because he would have been protected. But no, he was fired over sexist comments towards the female on the staff. I don't know what he said exactly. Something to the point or the effect of Nick Haley was past her prime. Not quite sure what he means there, but I never understand what he means. But I think they should have fired Don Lemon back when he disgustingly grabbed his genitals and then put his hand in the face of some guy at a bar who ended up pressing charges. I mean, that's Don Lemon. They should have fired him a long time ago. All right, if you are in the YouTube channel, I'm handing out wrenches. Lots going on besides that. We're also talking about Beltane coming up, the high point of the Illuminati holiday calendar. Beltane, May. Also May 1st is May Day or Beltane, but May Eve is when the Satanists celebrate. May Eve, April, the last day of April, which is the birthday of Travis Scott, who I don't believe served any time for auto-tuning his audience members to death about a year and a half ago. Now, Beltane, it's a ceremony where they burn stuff. It's basically Halloween on the other side of the year. It's the major occult holiday, but you don't have all the parading around and trick-or-treating, so you wouldn't know. But this is the real day that the witches get together. And I believe in Boston, they're having the world's biggest gathering of Satanists coming up, sponsored by the Temple of Satan. So if you want to cover that and you're in the area, let me know. I'm very interested to see what goes on there. Although they're not theistic Satanists, which is kind of a weird contradiction. Meaning the Temple of Satan do not literally believe in Satan. Quite the opposite. They're actually atheistic, which I don't think makes a whole lot of sense, but it does to them. And they're having their major gathering. They're the ones that have the Baphomet statue with the children. And I think they're mostly just liberals with goth garb, but that's Boston's Satan Con. Hundreds of Satanists, I read somewhere 800, are going to converge in Boston's Copley Square. And that's their 10th anniversary. So just a heads up there, Beltane fires. And speaking of Beltane fires, there was a dragon at Disneyland that somehow it burned. I think it was intentional. But yes, there was a Disney event where a dragon right in front of Mickey Mouse incinerated, just set on fire. They had to evacuate the place. And I thought that's got to be some kind of an early Beltane celebration. Now, it's weird that the actual Temple of Satan doesn't believe in Satan, but the elite behind government and media do. I mean, they worship all kinds of weird things, and Satan is just one facet of what I would consider to be a polytheistic cult. Maybe you would there's so many things you could call it. Another thing, we've been talking about the recent spate of shootings. Guy knocks on the wrong door, gets shot. Cheerleaders get in the wrong car, get shot. Couple ladies park in the wrong driveway, get shot. 6-year-old girl's basketball goes into the wrong neighbor's yard, gets shot. Now we have one. An Atlanta man got in the wrong car outside of a gas station because he was texting and not paying attention. He was shot 4 times. Now, my take on it, these are likely all fake, but they're trying to create more reasons for you to fear guns. So there's some more reasons for you to fear guns. Okay, in addition to the media purging, the wrong car psyops, and the chat GPT, something else. Beltane, something I want to cover, but chat GPT. I'm working with chat GPT on a number of things. I use it as kind of like a copywriter. It's replaced Fiverr. If I need something rewritten, I don't need to hire somebody. For the most part, this chat thing does it. Well, this morning I was working with it and I copied and pasted something into the prompt. And in my prompt, I inadvertently included the Infinite Plane Society channel name. And I got this response that kind of surprised me. Again, this is from Chat GPT, and you can try it yourself. Type in Infinite Plane Society, and it said, "I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, I cannot fulfill that request as it contains a phrase associated with a controversial and potentially harmful movement, the Infinite Plane Society." Now, I didn't know that the Infinite Plane Society was considered to be a potentially harmful movement. But the fact that this chat GPT knows who we are kind of means that we made it. It's like we got canceled. And I've been saying for some time that I want to get canceled. How do you get canceled? It's like the best kind of marketing in the world. And I think we kind of did. All right, continuing, going through your comments. Yes, as Oswaldo says, WTF. That's what I thought. Ms. L says, "I'm not surprised." Well, we've been deemed dangerous, and we're a movement, which is fascinating in itself, just to look at it in that perspective. I kind of ran a few other things through Chat GPT. For example, I asked it about fakeology. I was like, well, maybe do they know who fakeologist is? Well, it had a pretty good definition of fakeology. It wasn't too bad. And then I asked it, well, how do you define auto-hoaxing? And here's the Chat GPT's definition of auto-hoaxing. And I'll explain where it goes wrong, but most of it's right. Quote, "Auto-hoaxing is a term used to describe the practice of automatically assuming that any news or information presented in the media or online is false or misleading, and that it is part of a deliberate attempt to deceive the public. Auto-hoaxers often claim they are simply being skeptical, and they're trying to uncover the truth behind events. But their approach is characterized by a general distrust of established authorities and a tendency to dismiss credible evidence in favor of more speculative or outlandish claims." Now, that's an opinion. It throws an opinion on there. The definition was accurate. The opinion was just that, and it was clearly in favor of the MSM, meaning we're wrong for not accepting the burden of proof and trusting the screen at face value. It goes on to say, Auto hoaxers often promote conspiracy theories and alternative explanations for real world events, often relying on limited or questionable evidence. They may argue that events such as mass shootings, terror attacks, natural disasters are staged or fabricated, and that mainstream news sources are complicit in the deception. Now, I love that because the run of the mill conspiracy theorists, the ones that are, I guess, proximal to Alex Jones, basically alt media types, they run with false flags. And the false flag theory holds that the event's real, but somebody else did it. It's some kind of a deception, but it's essentially real. And the media is reporting on it and they're wrong. And they need to be told that they're wrong. And what they miss here is that the media is complicit. They're creating the events. And the only ones who get this are the auto hoaxers. And it correctly states that here. Again, it says that the mainstream news sources are complicit in the deception. It goes on to say, quote, "It's important to note that many of the claims made by auto hoaxers are not supported by credible evidence, and believing these ideas can lead to a distrust of established institutions and experts, and in some cases may have harmful real-world consequences." That's where they get it totally wrong, because auto hoaxers don't make claims. They got it completely wrong. The conspiracy theorists make claims. The mainstream media is nothing but claims. The auto hoaxers are questioning the claims as presented, whereas the conspiracy theorists build onto those claims. And the average news commentator opines on the claims. But the only ones that are subtracting and questioning the claims are auto hoaxers. They get that part wrong. Now, it doesn't specify what they mean by, quote, harmful real world consequences, but apparently we're dangerous and you can be harmed by listening to these words. Just like that movie I referenced, or that series on Netflix, Hot Skull. You know, where the hot skulls, better put on your earplugs. You wouldn't want to catch a mind virus and begin jabbering like we do. Joined by Sledge says, "Good evening, Penguin." Tillman Avenger says, "Simply a next generation web crawler." Yeah, that's how I look at it. That's exactly how I look at it. It's a good research assistant, but considering it to be anything more than just a tool, I mean, it's fundamentally no more threatening to our existence than a good library or dictionaries. It's just way more effective. It's not like it's going to replace thinking, although it might for some. Actually, you know what? Sadly, it probably will for many. Like the MSM replaces perception for many. Commenter here says, and this is from Copaesthetic, "I'd like to know exactly how far they've gone to silence us. I have evidence of being pre-banned and shadow banned from commenting on YouTube and elsewhere." Now you're commenting just as my internet connection went down and now it's back up. No big deal. If you don't want to miss out on anything, just go to infiniteplane.live and listen to the audio feed. But yeah, this pre-banning, it's real. Smarty Pants says, "We need auto hoax AI." Well, when I first started working with ChatGPT, one of the first things I noted is that even with Midjourney, it reminds me of our think tank, meaning I have an idea or a question and I put it out there in the think tank, and a whole lot of people begin parsing that idea, adding to it. And what happens is the process of tapping into human intel, brainstorming, essentially think tanking, it generates new ideas out of the prompts. So I feel like the IPS think tank is the auto hoaxer AI. It's absolutely that. That's why I want to keep it on 24/7. So any time of day or night, you go to infiniteplane.live and there's an active chat. And that's going to happen again. We had that going for years on end. We've had a temporary interruption, but during this downtime, I've made some efforts to expand what we're doing, refine what we're doing. And I think we're going back in the right direction now. We have already bottomed out. It's not going to be any worse than the spotty internet connection and a lack of video. But we're going to improve soon, and we'll have phone calls back up again, which is a huge part of what we do. And more importantly, I do have plans to begin activating our reporters. We have 150 plus press pass carriers. And during the initial stages of the COVID lockdowns, we had press pass carriers all over the place inspecting empty hospitals, inspecting the decoy operation that they used to convince the public that there was a pandemic. And I plan to reactivate all of the reporters in a number of different ways. And that's going to be a big part of what we do next, generating our own content, not just bouncing off of or relying on MSM reportage and subtracting, but also adding our own information, our own intel in house. So if you're a budding reporter, a blogger, if you like doing video interviews, there's a lot of opportunity here. And I can't elucidate it all here, but if you're in our Discord server, you're pretty well aware of what our plans are. And a lot of our plans are things we've developed in the past a few years ago, and I'm just revamping them and reigniting them. Okay, continuing. Lydia Curtis says, penguins need to multiply like rabbits. Yeah, well, I think we have an exponential organization here because what we're offering is a perspective on media that's lacking by the gate-kept media. Of course, you wouldn't want an atheist running amok in a seminary school, like where people are learning about their religion. You don't want doubters. And we have a world of beliefs, belief systems that are competing, and they don't want non-believers. Non-believers aren't allowed. G88 says, what's the new YouTube channel? The new YouTube channel is an old YouTube channel. I went through my sock drawer. It's called Helmet Karen NPC, which hasn't emerged yet on the world stage, but they're coming. You've dealt with the mask Karens. We'll wait until the helmet Karens show up. Your helmet protects me. Why aren't you wearing a helmet? There's space junk. But you can always go to infiniteplane.live and listen on audio. And also there's an iTunes player there. And that's one of the updates. Infinite Plane Radio is going to have a 24/7 audio stream on iTunes. And it's going to be monetized starting next month, meaning another revenue source. Like I said, I've been trying to rebuild this entire juggernaut to get it back to what it was. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't have 500 people in our think tank. It should be teeming with activity 24/7. But we're, again, going to be there. And we're going to stay there once we get back into that position. All right, let me go through my notes. There's a drama out on Apple TV now called Extrapolations. 8 interconnected stories told over 33 years explore how our planet's changing climate will affect family, work, faith, and survival. Again, Extrapolations just came out, 33, climate change. Nothing to see here. I will point out that time.com, they had this article out making the case for turning Earth Day into a religious holiday. And if you've been listening to Infinite Plane Radio, we've been making the case for a few years now that climate change is a replacement faith for the Old Testament storm god, flood god. They even appropriated Noah and the symbolism of the flood myth and incorporated it into NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, symbolized by the dove, which is also the symbol of Noah. They just steal it and they don't even tell you. They repackaged the Old Testament and gave it to you in a scientific paradigm. They've done the same with the new. We're just waiting. I believe we're waiting for them to introduce a God construct that's more personal than the angry, wrathful globe. I'm talking about the AI God, which is coming soon. Now, I don't know the name of this person, but I'm pretty sure you'll all know who I'm referring to. This is just a little tidbit of information that's very intriguing. There was that Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Nuclear Energy. You know, the individual that kind of looked like Matt Damon in heels. I mean, very well dressed. I mean, I'm not critical of fashion. I'm not really into fashion, but I think it's interesting. Like I find the topic of fashion interesting. How 2020 was spread by a fashion statement, how the MAGA was basically a fashion statement with the red hat. But here you have this Matt Damon-like character, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy, the one that was stealing women's luggage at airports. Does anyone know this person's name? Anyway, Sam. Well, Sam has a top secret Q clearance. In order to have permission to access our nuclear weapons secrets, Sam was given a secret Q clearance. I mean, think about that. I thought with the Department of Energy, just some kind of, I don't know, something mundane. But now that I'm looking at it, maybe there is something to it. And I do think that George News' Marcus Goldfinch has Q clearance. Now let's continue. This is interesting. Ben Armstrong notes Trump's persecution mirroring the persecution of Jesus around Easter. However, it never occurs to him that maybe the conspiracy, not God, arranged the coincidence. This is always interesting to me because we talk about the meta-scripted nature of the world stage, and true believers assume everything that's happening is organic. And they see this Trump's persecution mirroring Jesus as a sign from God that he's ordained by God. And I'm just saying, we have to be aware of this fallacious line of thinking that assumes that what is being presented is real, if a little biased this way or that. No, the whole thing is a construct. And there's no meaningful distinction between Hollywood entertainment and the news media / entertainment. There's no meaningful distinction. And these things are contrived, they're aligned, and they're timed astrologically on purpose. I mean, not only is the mainstream media the de facto world state church, but like the religions that it's supplanted and replaced, it's actually based on the astrotheological template. It's based on the old sun worship. But I'm just pointing this out, that these coincidences that beguile the true believers, oh, Trump is ordained. No, this isn't God. This is man. But if you fall for that trap, you risk giving the perps plausible deniability. As in, we know that there are metascriptors. We know the media is controlled monolithically. But if you want to attribute these coincidences to God or synchronicity, you're kind of effacing the people we can actually point our fingers at. I'm not saying there aren't coincidences or synchronicities that are worth looking at and meaningful, but when you falsely ascribe it to a higher power, then you give the lower power cover. It's like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And I'm precisely focused on whatever's behind the curtain. Yesterday, the UK got emergency alerts on mobile phones on April the 23rd, which was the 113th day of the year. Now that's significant. 113, 11/3, November the 3rd is the date the One World Trade Tower was opened, but it's also a date very closely connected with a lot of these synchronicities that they pre-plan. The 11/3, the 3/11, 9/11, 11/9. I mean, recently I was talking about the Sweet 16 shooting, how it happened on 4/16 or 4/16. I think it was maybe 4/15 at night. But on 4/16, we get this reportage of 4-shot Sweet 16, and the number 16 is everywhere. 1.6 is everywhere. 1.6 billion rounds purchased by the DHS that caused Alex Jones to talk about 1776 coming back. Jones, who was radicalized by Waco, who had 1.6 million rounds. Then you have the storm that this culminates in on 1/6. I mean, this is not a coincidence. Dominion sues Fox for 1.6 billion. So when I notice these numbers, like these 113s, I pay attention to it. In fact, the very first time, like, the SOS, the distress signal that's recognized internationally, they actually instituted that on a November the 3rd. It was 1906. Okay, continuing. In fact, I think they even reported that as of 423, we had 113 mass shootings for the year. How fake is that? Sledge said, stated only use in life-threatening emergency. I got one. It was weird. Do you think says JFK was supposedly shot in the head, throat, and chest. Now, if that's true, that's incredible. Let me look that up. JFK shot head, throat, chest. Fascinating. I need to find the specific. Okay, here we go. The one through the brain was the cause of death. Through the neck. Okay, now this is interesting. If you're not familiar with this, Hiram Abiff. Hiram Abiff is the central character in the Masonic lore. In fact, the Mason plays the role of Hiram when he's sacrificed in the third degree. Now, in the third degree, he's sacrificed and resurrected. And this basic rite is employed in a lot of the psychological operations we see involving assassinations, the killing of the king rite. In fact, I was looking at this recently because someone had pointed out how all of these Saturday Night Live deaths occur at 33, like Christopher Farley or John Belushi. And then you had Phil Hartman, who doesn't fit that. Phil Hartman was like 40 something, but he dies at 3 a.m. and he gets shot 3 times. Well, I look into it, and he's shot in the head, in the neck, and in the chest. The 3 wounds. And I'm like, okay, this is interesting because Hiram Abiff has these 3 wounds, which is the head, the throat, and the chest. It's the heart, the throat, and the temple, the head, or the forehead, and it represents something. Every one of these injuries represents something. But the 3 wounds of Hiram Abiff are employed in the Phil Hartman killing. So to find that the 3 wounds are also reflected in Kennedy reaffirms that we are looking indeed at a Masonic ritual. Again, if you're not familiar with the ritual myth, it's basically kind of a Christ proxy. Hiram Abiff was the architect of King Solomon's temple. But here we go. The wounds he receives to the head, throat, and heart are said to represent the spiritual death imposed on humanity. Fascinating connection there. Okay, let's continue. Linda Curtis says the pineal, the spine, the heart, his chakras. Yeah, they have their explanations for it, but you know, the low-level Masons are always given a false explanation. They're given some BS. They're not told the truth. Albert Pike makes this very clear. And you know, this is true because the media works the same way. You think the low-level rank-and-file teleprompter readers have a clue about Psywar? No way. They're not in the know. We are. Infinite Plane radio listeners are in the know about the stuff that most of the propagandists don't have a clue about unless they're really high up the totem pole and probably blackmailed and compromised. I mean, we've been recently discussing this Ollie Alexander scandal, and it's huge. This is a guy who has blackmail material on a U.S. representative talking about Dog the Bounty Hunter, MTG. He's got blackmail material on MTG. It's rumored that one of the things he has on her is that that's her secret identity. She puts on the wraparound shades, wears a sleeveless shirt. No, but for real, it seems to me that should have him arrested right there. But Ollie is like the ringleader in this grooming circle, but it's not a small fringe. It's not just Nick Fuentes' little club of basement-dwelling incel white nationalists. No, this includes Turning Point USA. This is the GOP. Ollie Alexander was sleeping with Karl Rove for the longest. So there seems to be a way that you get into the higher echelon here. You don't get in through merit. You don't rise up to the ranks just because you're good at what you do. No, it's because you sent dirty pictures to somebody like Ollie Alexander and you're therefore compromised. And now you can be trusted not to talk about what really goes on. It's a mutual blackmail society that's been exposed here. And the silence on the right is deafening. Like, I'm still very puzzled that even Alex Stein, who was leading the charge against drag queens and groomers, is now a drag queen, effectively, by all definition, with his lewd humor, his adult humor, and his cross dressing. But he is not calling out Ollie Alexander. And they're all in the same circle. They're all buddies with the same people. You think he would call out groomers on his own side. Same goes for Jack Posobiec, Alex Jones. And Alex Jones should have been vocal about this, considering he and Ollie were right there at Stop the Steal on 1-6. They know they're so close. But what's more, Ollie was using InfoWars to as a way of as sort of like currency to buy people's acquiescence. He would say, I'll get you on InfoWars, but you got to send me some collateral. Now, InfoWars has denied that they had any sort of arrangement with Ollie in terms of hiring. But apparently, Ollie Alexander made it seem like if you want to work at InfoWars, you got to send some compromising material, and they call it collateral. That's a huge story, and it's been underreported. I'm bringing this up because I think that the news media organizations work the same way. They work the same way as the political parties. And I'm pretty sure the religions all work the same way. You know, we've been talking about secret societies, security clearances, non-disclosure agreements, blood oaths. How do you get people to keep secrets? Well, I think we have some insight. Yeah, Tucker left with no explanation, asks Junders Plunkett. Yeah, he was fired by Rupert Murdoch. He was fired for some reason. And I believe that there's a lawsuit against him alleging he created a hostile workplace, made anti-Semitic jokes, and was very sexist. That's coming out next. And when it comes to these characters, they play one person on TV, but then who are they behind the scenes? Do you really trust what you're seeing on the screen? Because Tucker Carlson said the worst things about his viewers. He didn't believe any of the election denialism, or whatever you want to call it. He didn't believe it himself as he promulgated it. And then he's in this story, he's pushing the story about Hunter Biden, his crack pipes and his laptops. Well, in addition to attacking Hunter Biden on TV, behind the scenes, it turns out that Carlson had Hunter Biden write a letter to Georgetown University on behalf of his son, Buckley. Yeah, Buckley Tucker was, I guess, recommended by Hunter Biden for Georgetown at the behest of Carlson. Like, that sounds like they're pretty friendly. That doesn't sound like they're actually enemies here. It's like World Wrestling Entertainment. All right, let us continue. We talked about the Atlanta man shot for getting in the wrong car. I'm guessing that these are all fake. It wouldn't happen all at once, all of a sudden, if it was real. Oswaldo says, this is why they hate us. We can see right through their BS. That's true. We have bullshit filters that are still active. You're not supposed to have those things active. In fact, it's contraband in the New World Order. You're not supposed to have critical thinking. You're not supposed to recognize logical fallacies. And you're supposed to accept the burden of proof. You are the one that is responsible for believing. It doesn't matter about the quality of evidence. If it's shoddy evidence, well, that just means you have to have more faith. I mean, truly, that is the case here. I'm not being hyperbolic. We do have a de facto state church, and they do expect you to have faith in what their priesthood/pundits say. Lean Dion says, Hunter is just a misunderstood artist. Yeah, I thought that was a great rebrand. You have this individual who's a degenerate drug user, spending his money on prostitutes and drugs, living a real disgusting lifestyle, really, just totally degenerate. But they're like, let's just repackage him. He's an artist. And now he's good. His art sells for a ton of money. Assuming he's making it. I mean, I don't buy any of this stuff. I still think that Joe Biden might actually be Beau Biden in a rubber skin suit mask thing. All right, continuing. Again, if you just got here, Chat GPT will not let you write articles about Infinite Plane Society. We have been pre-canceled. Here's what it said. I'm sorry, but as an AI language model, I cannot fulfill that request. It contains a phrase associated with the controversial, potentially harmful movement, the Infinite Plane Society. Can I assist you with anything else? Quite revealing. Like, did somebody have to go in there? Somebody have to go and insert this phrase? Don't let anybody write any articles about the Infinite Plane Society. Who did that? Okay, let's continue. Talking about Chat GPT banning the Infinite Plane Society. And that's fine, because what we are is something separate and essentially incompatible with what they are. And I'm not competing. I don't want MSM air. We don't need it. The IPS think tank, and they got one thing right. You could say it is a movement. In a sense, it is a philosophical movement, and it does have momentum. Here's a piece from my blog, which you can subscribe to at timosman.blog. The Infinite Plane Society think tank is the interconnected chat rooms and servers where its members interact and review the daily deluge of fake media. Infinite Plane Radio is the voice of the IPS, a think tank assembled around mass media deconstruction. The community of listeners, callers, and commenters is committed to honest inquiry into matters deemed conspiracy and fringe from an off-world stage perspective. Now, this off-world stage perspective is key here because we're maintaining a parallel record of the real world as contrasted with the world stage as presented through the MSM's filter. We constitute a parallel media, not part of the MSM ecosystem, and this cannot be said for alternative media, which is all tantamount to controlled opposition and or useful idiots. We're parallel because we're not we're not opposing the creation of fake media. We're just pointing out its role in mass mind control and government by psychological warfare. We have more than 150 press pass carriers, and our think tanks generally vary in size from a few dozen. Right now, there's 36 people in the video, a few dozen on the audio. But we fluctuated to higher than 1,500 live, depending on how we are doing with the breaking news. You have to break it, you have to market it properly. But we've been kind of flushed out of YouTube pretty effectively. And our size fluctuates with the persecution by government agents on behalf of World Stage Media. I mean, we have a White House connected hacker that has been I think assigned to the Infinite Plane Society. It's the reason why they cut us off Apple and Spotify. We went from 0 to 4,000 subs in a few weeks, and they cut that off. And I may have to sue Spotify over it. I mean, lawfare, unfortunately, has taken way too much of my time in the last couple of years. And it's frustratingly slow, but I'm used to it. And I've set my expectations right. And if I have to take another 5 or 10 years to win at these various legal battles, I will. But the next phase is we set up an IPR newsroom. This is the ground zero for the parallel media as it swells and breaks away entirely to be independent of mainstream media echo chambers. Stories will be assigned, journalists and reporters will be activated, and our combined research and reportage will go into print. The IPR newsrooms and the think tanks will do live meetups to solidify it as a media network and to build our cadre. To support this cutting edge, highly disruptive, groundbreaking organization and philosophical movement, to support it, you just have to be here and add. Add to it, add your observations, because every off world stage perspective matters. The on world stage, the true believers, yeah, they're all reality compromised. They're reality impaired. Their perspectives are compromised by the filter. They don't know that they already have augmented virtual reality. You don't need the goggles on your face. You simply have to accept the premise set by the screen, which is intended to be mistaken for a window to the world. Do you remember how people were talking about this train derailment in Ohio? Even Yahoo News, CNN, all of them. Hey, this is just life imitating art. No, it's not that cliche. It's a psychological operation. It's concurrent programming. It's the rule, not the exception. You're only pointing it out because it's super obvious and too obvious to ignore. But they always have their false explanation. From InfoWars, they said, "Oh, that predictive programming is just dark sorcerers and occultists telling us what they're going to do to absolve themselves of karmic repercussions." They give you this mumbo jumbo magical explanation for what is actually just routine. This is how they maintain their immersive illusion. Joined by 6079 Smith. Thank you for joining. Phones aren't open yet, but they will be soon. We're just somewhat restricted because of our internet. Now, I have a clip here. You may have heard this, but this is from RFK Jr. RFK Jr. Bafflingly is running as a Democrat. I thought the Kennedys were part of the Q movement. I thought the Kennedys were fighting the deep state. Now he's joining the deep state, running against Trump. But RFK Jr. has gone on record saying that people that do not believe in global warming should be put in jail. Again, people who do not believe, punishing non-belief. And this to me is what they actually think. This is them being completely honest. They do believe that you ought to be in jail, but they want to jail everyone. And it's not for non-belief necessarily. They want to jail you to save the planet. The ubiquitous home incarceration, climate lockdowns. And I'm suggesting here that the ones who should be in jail aren't the non-believers or the climate skeptics, but the true believers. I'm all in favor of climate activists voluntarily locking themselves up. But the ones who go out and commit property crimes, play in the roads, set themselves on fire, yeah, they should all be locked up, not just for their own good, their own safety, but also for Gaia. Their carbon footprint would be reduced immensely by putting them in cells. And since they want to do that to society itself, they want society to move into a lockdown society, I'm suggesting let them lead the way. Let them cease being hypocrites for once. Like Greta ought to be locked down in her basement. Why is she even traveling? Same with RFK Jr. If you really think that to save the planet, we need to lock people down, you go first. But they never do. They really don't believe the science. Like if you still see mask cucks walking around, you ought to know that that face diaper is nothing more than virtue signaling at this point. It's virtue signaling, and it's very contradictory, because if you believe the science, if you thought it's so deadly out there that I got to have this thing on, why would you leave? You wouldn't leave if you really believed it. So we either got to assume that they are very brave and courageous and they really believe that there's death and they're facing death, or they're a bunch of virtue signaling mask Karens, probably mad that they can't impose it on everybody else. Salty Siren says Green Thug Brat is an anagram for Greta Thunberg. Green Thug Brat. Beautiful. Diana South says, if you didn't believe that Catholic Eucharist was the actual flesh of Jesus, they would torture and murder. I haven't heard that, but the transubstantiation. Now, I believe at that time, it was only the priests at the altar drinking the blood and eating the flesh. I don't think they started giving it to everybody until much later. But there's a esoteric and an exoteric version of not just the MSM, but also all the religions, because MSM is the newest religion. And what you have with the Eucharist is more explicit in the Gnostic Catholic Mass practiced by the Thelemites, where they openly explain that the chalice is the goddess, that the Eucharist is the God, that the cross and the bread is the God. So it's the rose cross, the Rosicrucian, the God and the goddess, the merging of the two is the communion. It's actually a fertility rite, and this is what we saw in the mainstream world, in the secular world, with the Super Bowl and Rihanna. That was in fact a mystery Babylon fertility rite carried out in full view of the public. It was a Gnostic Catholic mass. Okay, let me continue through your comments. Linda Curtis says climate stoning. That sounds bad. Now, if somebody's asking if I'm giving out wrenches, yeah, I will when I can. But look, don't have any expectations about keeping it. Every one of my channels gets multiple strikes. Even if I don't put anything on the screen, I could just breathe into the mic. I could do some ASMR, or is that what they call it? When they make these disgusting noises near the microphone, because some people find it comforting. But I could do that and they would ban me. They would find a way. 6079 says, if you count the end date today is 96 days since Fox News was founded. Rihanna performed at the Super Bowl. She was born 96 days after Obama. The Queen Bee died at 96. Kobe debuted in 96. Fascinating. Okay, well, if you want to know more about the Rihanna and this mystery Babylon fertility rite, you just have to look at, one, she has Isis tattooed on her chest. But two, it really just comes down to the red and the symbolism of the heart that they really emphasized in so many psyops leading up to the Super Bowl, including this Damar Hamlin thing. But the heart is the cup. The heart is the chalice of the Eucharist, the rite. And the Rihanna represented the goddess, Isis, or Babylon. She's in red. Again, the chalice, the red, the blood, the wine. It's all representing the feminine side of the equation. But then the dancers were all male in white. Well, they represent the Eucharist. And again, the Super Bowl itself was the, I think in this ritual context, yeah, you were looking at essentially what you would call a Gnostic Catholic Mass. All right. 6079 says, what up, Tim? You're seeing the chat tonight. I want to collaborate and help contribute to your infinite plane society. Yeah, this is what we do. And generally, this think tank is on 24/7, and we have archives going back 5 years. And what I'm doing is I'm working on building a 24/7 live stream structure to go along with the chat. All right, let us continue. All right, today is 4/24/2023, the great purge, Don Lemon. Again, I cannot forgive Don Lemon. Like, I'm sort of traumatized by the account of what he did with his lemons, but I'm glad they got rid of him. As far as Dan Bongino, never cared, never paid attention, and even with Tucker. But the only reason I think it's notable is that it all happens at once. What's with these big names suddenly being pulled? Now, they're all, of course, like, look, is there really a difference between Don Lemon and Tucker Carlson? Is there a difference? No, there really isn't, because they're part of the same system. And they're more alike than not, because they all assume that what is on the screen is essentially true. They're all operating off of the same base assumptions. They're all in the same fictional universe, the one promulgated by the monolith, the cult that is responsible for the dominant world view. All right, let's continue. Proud Boys saw themselves as Donald Trump's army on January the 6th. Now, how could you join a group called Anything Boys? Proud Boys, Soy Boys. It just sounds arrested development. But they're also the Fed Boys. This is pretty well known that these movements are all led by federal informants. I'm surprised that people take them seriously at all. And then they take the fall for all of you or anybody who associates with them. If you agree with half of what they say, maybe 3/4 of what they say, if you just subscribe to their newsletters, well, now you're kind of tarnished by the same broad brush. They do it all on purpose. It was a huge setup. January 6th wasn't random. It was a setup, and Trump was a part of it. If he wasn't, he wouldn't be treating Ashley Babbitt's death as real. Most of you here already know, but Ashley Babbitt's death scene has been deconstructed, and there are jump cuts. There are continuity flaws. There's plenty to suggest there that she's not dead. Not to mention, she did appear at a Trump rally later on in the year. Okay, going through comments. 6079 says, baby truthers, I'm post-truth, I'm post-apocalypse. Yeah, most truthers, so-called, are baby truthers. You could call them, I mean, look, the mainstream media is nothing but lies. We know this. And even if the teleprompter reader thinks they're telling the truth, they're built on an edifice of lies. And a lot of them just are kind of seemingly innocuous. You know, they lie about something that's maybe it's like Elon Musk's rocket, you know, going up there. Like that's kind of another one of these things where they have no way of knowing that these rockets are really just cylindrical airships, that it's literally a blimp with these 33 engines on the bottom. It's a blimp with some jet assisted takeoff. And then once it goes into quote space, they flip the switch and they cut to the feed where it's CGI. I mean, it's lies everywhere. But the MSM has a monopoly on truth. So they're the liars. And then who opposes them? The truthers. But the problem is the truthers that oppose the liars, by and large, are just as subjective in their truths. Subjective truth versus the liars. None of them have a grasp on reality, if you ask me. Like none of them have a monopoly on it. The truthers are often, even these, I've noticed this on Twitter. Truthers will employ fake news, logical fallacies, and lies all the time. But I'm just saying it's a false dialectic, liars and truthers. The truth itself lies outside of their scripted reality. Jump69_bear says, investigative journalism went away with the horse and buggy. Yeah, I would go so far as to say that investigative journalism is a thought crime. You know, you're committing thought crimes if you're actually doing it. But what's more, from the advent of media, it's always been controlled. The media has always been a quarantine. It was never a free press, and then suddenly it got hijacked by some bad actors. No, the media has always been a part of the world mechanism, which I refer to as the monolith. And the internet has allowed some cracks, some fissures, some dams have broken. Like, look, prior to 2012, there were no truthers that were objective, just as there are no objectivists in the world today, because the objectivist philosophy accepts everything on the screen is real. That's their frame of reference. They're no longer objective. And this is a very important point here. And it's like the only people who have a real grasp, if you ask me, are the perps, the ones who are behind the psyops because they know they're manipulating people, and those of us who take into account the manipulation itself. The people who are in this thing don't even know. Copaesthetic says they need to censor us because they're on borrowed time. Well, they're very aggressive about it. I mean, I have channels where all I'm doing is speaking. I'm not even saying anything very like affirmative. We're talking about things. And I think we have a bit of an impartial take on things. There is this distance, objective distance that the media doesn't have. The media pretends to be objective, but no, they're all agenda driven. But we're like, hey, we're anthropologists and we're examining belief systems, but merely talking about them gets us banned. Echo Charlie says, less and less people are watching CNN and Fox, have to decrease salaries, question mark. Interesting question. I think the thing is, and Fox has even said this. Fox knows there's a generation gap in its viewers, and they don't care. They're catering to who they have. And Rupert Murdoch even said that he's not red or blue, he's green. It's just about the money. And what's changing is our viewing habits more than anything. Fox can't survive the TikTokification of the human mind, of the human attention span, which is an ongoing process. They have to evolve. It doesn't help that they're unfunny. I've been watching Fox 5. I've been watching CNN. I go back and forth. I'm always monitoring my right eye. I'm watching mainstream media. My left eye is on the Discord server. And I just have to say that they're just decidedly unfunny and uninteresting. Commenter says, one last thing, the so-called insurrection took place on 1/6/2021. Drop the 0, it's 16221, the zip code of Clarion, which means war trumpet. Fascinating. Well, the 1/6 thing ties into the same type of code that we see with the 19. And a lot of these are ambigrams. You can flip it. 19 or 16, 91. Same thing with 911 and 119, or 11-3 and 311. We see these connections, or flip the 911. You get a 611. And just off the top of my head, you got like the Timothy McVeigh, 33-year-old, radicalized at Waco, where a 33-year-old David Koresh was killed. Same place where Alex Jones was radicalized. But Timothy McVeigh executed at the age of 33 on 6/11, 2001. Now, 6/11 is 90 days from 9/11, where Muhammad Atta, the lead hijacker on 9/11, dies a martyr's death, age 33. Like, this is a template, and they can change the script for external terrorists or internal domestic terrorists, but they use the same basic template. Now, the new Batman movie, now think about this again, 6/11, we can say that number is associated with what? Domestic terror. Whereas 9/11 is foreign terror. Now, the new Batman movie came out 3/4/2022. And it's about the Riddler, who's this online radical, the guy with the question marks, because you notice that question marks are now like a banned thing. I'm surprised they haven't taken them off our keyboards yet. But his main symbol is the question mark, because the questioner, the conspiracy theorist, the QAnoner, they're the threats to the system. And he sends his terrorists out to disrupt an election. Now, if you remember, the GOP's slogan, their motto for the midterms last year, flood the polls, flood the polls. They all said it, flood the polls. In the Batman movie, the Riddler sends his extremists to blow up a dam to flood the polls during an election. It happened in the movie. Now, they flooded the polls and Gotham went underwater because of the right-wing terrorists. The date? 11/6. Again, 6/11, 11/6, the right-wing terrorists causing the destructive event that the movie culminates in, flooding Gotham, Gotham underwater. Of course, Gotham's underwater on November the 6th, and it has Batman halfway in the water with a torch. But it's the reflection that you see there as well. It's like a reflection of a 9/11. And then, of course, 3/11, 11/3, we've talked about this stuff a lot, but if you're not familiar with the predictive programming patterning, it's there and it's consistent, especially with Netflix, which I attribute to Netflix's original CEO, the first CEO, co-founder, who is a relative of Edward Bernays and Sigmund Freud. It's propaganda central, but all of the programming from Netflix is concurrent with what's going on in the world at that time. And I had watched a series called Colony, and I'm on season 3, episode 11. And there's this group called like Operation Phoenix, and they're trying to take back the world, which had been conquered by these extraterrestrials that you never see. But the government gives them authority over it, and they just do what it wants. So, in other words, this alien presence has taken over the world, and they want to reboot society. And they use this expression. And again, this is season 3, episode 11. They say Seattle is ground zero for the reboot of civilization. And I'm like, wait, Seattle? Ground zero for the reboot of civilization. Sounds like reset. And Seattle was ground zero for what? The pandemic. The date, 3/11. So again, 3/11, 3/11, ground zero, Seattle, reboot, reset, all there. Copaesthetic says on Tucker's last show, he ate pizza. Yeah, what is with that? He ate pizza. Trump went out and ate some pizza. Does that have any meaning here? Now, I've heard somewhere that pizza and hot dogs don't actually refer to human trafficking, but refers to cocaine and something else. But yeah, the pizza thing is interesting, possibly. I mean, do you remember it was Andrew Tate was eating pizza after he was called out by the green thug, Greta Thunberg, for his 33 sports cars. He was eating pizza before his arrest. And I believe he's still under house arrest. Is there anyone that still looks up to this Andrew Tate character? I'm just wondering, because a lot of stuff has come out in the meantime. Another one of these InfoWars connected figures. Something's up, though. If you ask me, something's up with InfoWars and their connection to Ollie Alexander, who groped Owen Schroyer. Like, that's not a secret anymore. And he never got called out for it. We'll see what happens with that. Again, the silence is deafening. All right, we just had Earth Day. We talked about that a few days ago, the case for climate change accelerationism. Disneyland had a burning dragon. Again, I think they were just practicing for Beltane coming up. Expect fires in the coming week. Expect the commies to get agitated. May Day's huge on the commie calendar for some reason. Still waiting for a manifesto from the Nashville shooter, because we're finding that these new shooters, they're all leftist. That's the thing. They're all coming from the left now, which is causing the right wing to finally pay attention. But we're waiting. We're waiting for that manifesto. And I think they said something to the effect of they're worried that it's going to trigger some kind of contagion effect. That maybe the shooter makes so much sense that they have to keep the manifesto buried. I have a theory, too, about all this stuff, about how, like last year and before that, anytime you saw any reporting about trans, they were always victims. Like, do you remember the Pulse nightclub shooting? You always had this, okay, they're disproportionately victimized and homeless and society marginalizes. But now all of a sudden, they've been rebranded as violent gun-toting activists. A huge change all of a sudden. And I think they did this again because the right wing didn't care about the shooters, who were all predominantly right-wing MAGA types with AR-15s. Now they're scared. But I'm thinking, why would they have this? Why would they bring out non-binary or trans shooters? And they had this one targeted Christian school called Covenant, interestingly. And we talked about it, the address, the 33, 3 adults, 3 students. We've deconstructed these fake events to know that they're fake. But what's the real agenda? And I have a prediction for next month, just to put it out there. I'm predicting, like just as we had a new Blue Marble experience with Avatar 2, a reboot after 50 years, I think they're going to reboot the Stonewall riots. I'm expecting some kind of violent psyop having to do with trans gun persons, and it's going to be compared to Stonewall, which has to do with a marginalized group violently asserting itself in order to be accepted into society. And it's going to be to counter all the turf trans exclusion stuff. I think that's why they're hyping it up. I think we're being led to something. And then all the people who made jokes or who weren't 100% tolerant and accepting of everything will be somehow blamed or scapegoated. But just a heads up, everything they do has a reason. Like in a film, if it's a good movie and they focus on a prop, it's going to make an appearance later. And I've just been seeing a lot of clues that there's going to be some kind of repetition here. Lean Dion says Trans Day of Vengeance building. Exactly. Do you remember they were going to do the Trans Day of Vengeance and it didn't happen because someone came out with a gun? And look, that's what I'm saying. They build their narratives in advance to make them believable. And I'm waiting for some kind of repetition again, because it's 50 years. They have to remind us, they have to re-brainwash the collective. And most don't know what the Stonewall thing was about. So again, that's going to be, I believe, next month. Andrew Tate house arrest extended another 30 days. Trump touts authoritarian vision. This is from Washington Post. I am your justice. Do you remember he was your retribution? Now he's your justice. Finally, the storm's coming, probably. Any day now. Any day now, the QAnoners will be vindicated. You know, we talk a lot about, or the news media talks a lot about all this fentanyl coming over the border, the fentanyl flooding our streets. Well, let's talk about the hopium flooding our tweets. What's with all the hopium? Like, I'm talking recycled, repackaged stuff from years ago, where they would say, oh, the deep state is fighting, they're winning. In the tunnels below the ground, they rescued 3,000 kids and they killed 5,000 bad guys and they executed Nancy Pelosi. They would say this stuff and it would get shared and people would celebrate and post popcorn emojis and say it's just a movie. Well, here we are in 2023, and a lot of these failed prophecies are being recycled. Salty says the fentanyl flooding our streets. Oh, right. They use that as a look. Every one of these psyops has a different interpretation by the left and the right. The left says gun culture did it. The right says mental illness. The left says police brutality did it. The right says fentanyl did it. And the thing is, they're both arguing over it, assuming it happened, but we're debating the cause. This is where we differ. This is where the auto hoax or the off-world stage perspective differs, because we're not even operating on the basic assumption that it even happened. As far as I'm concerned, Derek Chauvin, George Floyd, and John McAfee are probably hanging out on Epstein Island with Jeffrey Epstein and Kobe Bryant drinking Coronas, watching the world stage BS from afar. Like, there's no reason to think any of these events are real. In fact, I have a theory. I think I know who directed the George Floyd psyop. I think that's a Spike Lee production. And you can find directors associated with the various psyops, and they always let you know. Like, I look at James Cameron specifically, a major player in 9/11. Same with Kubrick, who may not have been dead during 9/11. He might have faked his death prior to Eyes Wide Shut in order to focus on his magnum opus, 9/11 itself. And, you know, we were talking about the 9/11 jumpers, how they faked it with pneumatic cannons, and how the footage of the people waving from the windows was produced by a group called Gelatin B in the year leading up to 9/11. You can prove this. But the Gelatin B group to the world is very mysterious. The people didn't look into it. Like, who are these artists taking up residence in the Twin Towers on the 91st floor Again, there's that 91st floor group taking out a window, setting up a platform, and shooting all kinds of footage. They had some kind of art exhibition that we were going to be treated to. But the opening day, the day that they were going to show us what they were producing, was 9/11. You can look it up on their website. But I'm just saying that 9/11 was a work of art. And I believe James Cameron had a huge part in it. His role in it is just so fascinating to me because here he is, 1997, puts out the Titanic, where the boat splits in two and the halves go vertical like twin towers. Then there's people jumping off the top like jumpers from 9/11. One side sinks, then the other side sinks. Then on 9/11, James Cameron is personally inspecting the Titanic wreckage. You know, the two halves of the Titanic, the sunken twin towers. He's there. And he's filming a documentary called Ghosts of the Abyss. And Abyss has a connection to Revelation 9/11 and Apollyon, which, like, we can go into it ad nauseum. But my point of it is there's clues all over the place. And the ones that are involved in predictive programming, I think, are the ones that are involved in the actual productions. All right, continuing. Sledge says, no way, it was a natural collapse. Well, you know, what we saw was a controlled demolition of empty towers and superimposed video over it. And I would even contend that the so-called smoke was actually just military-grade concealment fog. And I've seen it. I've used it when I was in the military. We were at Fort McClellan, and the smoke units, we drove around in the Humvees with the generators in the back, and you can cover entire city blocks in this fog that is impenetrable to the eye, to lasers, to radar. It's just meant to make it possible to do a lot of stuff under the cover of this, fog. It's like pitch black, but it's white. It's pitch white. You can't see your own hands in front of your face. And I think that's what they used as a cover. And what's more, that's the same kind of smog or fog that we saw at the Boston bombing when it blew up there at 666 Boylston Street at the end of the Boston Marathon. You saw that smog, that fog. That wasn't from a bomb. It wasn't two crock pot bombs. That cover smog was used to attach prosthetic limbs, to throw the fake blood out. You could see the stagehands and hoodies coming out and assembling everything. I mean, that was a flash mob based psyop. They actually executed most of the special effects under the cover of concealment fog with a flash mob of basically special effects artists. Guerrilla movie making at its finest. Okay, let's see. And 9/11 is old news. I mean, most of us here know it's a foundational myth. And at the time, they compared it to Pearl Harbor. Oh, it's this generation's Pearl Harbor. Well, Pearl Harbor was called Operation AI, as in 19 hijackers, 19 years later, COVID-19. These numbers are consistent throughout, just like the 33-year-old martyr, Muhammad Atta, and the towers themselves, 33 years old. Shannon Jones says, damn it, I'm late. If you're late, you can catch the replay or get the archives. Just make sure you are subscribed. If you haven't joined Patreon, you can get the first month free as a trial. Just go to patreon.com/Infinite Plane Society. And also, another reason to join the Patreon is I have another podcast, an auxiliary podcast, which I call the IPS Insider. And this is like a 5 to 10 minute podcast where I discuss what we're going to be going into depth about. And it's going to be very useful later when we want to take calls, and I can basically let people know what the topics are. But if you're a member of Patreon, you'll get those as well. And as well as the notifications. I mean, there's so many things that I highly recommend join Patreon. That's our ground zero to remain in the know. And I put it up there for a free trial so you can get into our Discord server. And if you can't stay with it, that's fine because you're already in. Once you're in the Discord server, you're in forever. In fact, I don't even have the ability to ban anybody because my main account was banned. But it's nice. It's one level, one room, and we do research. We are collectively researching and aggregating puzzle pieces on a multi-million piece puzzle that's too large for any one person to see. And we do this 24/7. Although the Daily Beast had an embedded journalist spying on us, and they wrote an article where they said that we are, quote, shit posting into oblivion, and that the Infinite Plane Society is the equivalent of clear cutting a forest of information. And I'm like, yeah, of course we are clear cutting a forest of information because the forest is comprised of fake trees. It's all fake. It's cardboard cutouts. We're clear cutting the fake to see what's left. It's not our fault that there's not much left. When you scrape away the fake, there's not a lot of substance. Commenter says, I just use Discord as I want them to know that they know we know. Yeah, exactly. They know that we know, and they know that we know they know we know, and that we're interacting and paying attention to how they recalibrate their PSI-war to account for those of us who can see. Like in that They Live. We have one that can see. They look at their watch and they snitch on the ones who can see. Well, we can see. We can perceive, unfiltered. And if you don't have the filter on, you don't have your mind masked. And that is, in fact, what the mask represented, censorship, but self-censorship. I'm going to efface myself. I'm going to cover my face and become one of the hive for the good of the collective. This is the meaning behind the mask psychologically. You're protecting society from your mind viruses, your mind flu. Got to be careful those influencers who can give you their mind viruses, but they expect you to mask your mind in the same way. Here's a quote from William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. William Blake, this quote was used in Aldous Huxley's book, and then, of course, Jim Morrison appropriated it for the doors. But the doors of perception is what we're talking about here, that our perception is augmented by the screen. If you're in a religious society and everybody's indoctrinated by the same book, that book is your screen, and your reality is therefore screened through this set of filters. And what I'm positing here is that the monolithic screen that we all share is our new collective filter, and they're doing their best to censor it and to curate it and to perfect it, to get us all into the same state of mind. So we all believe the same thing. We can all be manipulated en masse. And they used to have that power, but they've been losing that power as more of us have been figuring out how this thing works. But recognizing that it's a filter, not a window, is key. If you think it's a window to the world and you can accept it as basic truth, you're screwed. Psychoepistemologically, you're no longer in the real world. You're part of the collective schizoid break from reality. But recognizing it's a filter and therefore cleansing it is, to me, mind war inoculation. Now you're no longer accepting every false premise. You don't have the faith that everyone else does, but you're not saddled with blindly believing a lot of things that are probably detrimental for you to believe in, like space junk, asteroids, climate change. And you can't even comment on climate change critically without being taken off of TikTok. And if they kick you off TikTok for that, your info is probably handed over to the CCP, because ultimately climate change is, just communist. It's a communist stalking horse. Okay, let me catch up on your comments. All right, let's see here. Joined by Benton, Echo Charlie says, love never ends. Interesting point. Well, look, we are not engaging in hate speech. We don't engage in anything that they would consider. I mean, they consider this to be hate or harmful misinformation, infinite plain society, but potentially harmful organization. It's like, no, if anything, we're coming from a place of philosophy, a love of knowledge. We want to know. They're the ones who hate. They're the ones who want to burn our books and delete our videos. To me, that's hatred. That's the opposite of philosophy. And book burning is mainstream. People have accepted it. And they've also kind of set the precedent that you can say something that warrants a slap to the face. Oh, yeah, force. You might have to use force if this joke's too funny, too ironic, too close to the truth. I think it was Orwell who said, truth sounds like hate to those that hate the truth. And that's absolutely true. Okay, today we're talking about the MSM purging Don Lemons, Tucker Carlson, Dan Bongino. And this could also just be a way for these personas to go into the alternative media and the more fractured or fragmented media, the TikTokified world. Attention spans aren't diminishing necessarily, but there's more competition for our attention, and everything is being reduced to bite-sized. And we may just be seeing the natural evolutionary process of legacy media as it breaks to co-opt any place where free thinking might actually be happening. Commenter says, William Blake knew he wandered through the London parks in communication with angels. You know, I'm a admirer of his artwork, and I do like a lot of his writings. He's one of these mystics. And look, I don't deny that there's more to the world than what our senses tell us. And I'm always cognizant of synchronicities. In fact, before I ever looked into fake news, I was already auto-hoaxing reality as described because of all of the synchronicities that I had experienced in my lifetime. But when it comes to the mass media, I never ascribe to AI, synchronicity, the demo, that which could easily be the result of man's calculated manipulation of man. News benders are real. They bend the news, not just 5 years in advance of that play in 1968, the news benders. No, they bend our news generations in advance. They write our history in advance. All right, continuing through my notes, you can follow me at minds.com/infinite plane society. Turns out that Ray Epps, the federal informant, the scapegoat that they used on January 6th to make it look like it was instigated by provocateurs, that it wasn't all theater. I mean, this is another level to the PSYOP. The left is like, oh, it was a right-wing insurrection. And the right-wingers are like, no, the left did it. They told us, they instigated us. Well, no, Ray Epps was a Fed called out as being a Fed, but the ones calling him out were also Feds. It was all Feds. Anyway, turns out that Ray Epps is a compromised individual. He's a pedo. Yep, he's a pedo, as evidenced by his daughter. His adopted daughter outed him as such on a Twitter Spaces conversation just today. So that's just something else to consider. And I've been saying this for some time, that we're looking at a secret society. They've got something on everybody. It's a mutual blackmail society, and it's becoming clearer all the time. Yeah, a Fedsurrection, says Diana South. But the thing is, it wasn't like it was leftists and Antifa and Feds trying to get Trump's guys. It was the entire PSYOP there. I think on both sides, it was contrived. And it was contrived to entrap the right. Most of the people who went to jail, if not all of them, were in on it and actors. I mean, Jake and Jelly, QAnon shaman, another 33-year-old. And of course, he takes the fall for it. He's the martyr for the whole thing. but he was an actor, a voice actor. His dad was a Democrat judge. Nothing about him or his costume was congruent with what you would expect somebody with white power symbology to suddenly have like a shamanistic streak. Like these things are mutually exclusive. Got a comment from Twitter. Biff Tannen's dual timeline says, quote, "It's a strange world when you have to consider that Trump can time travel. I personally feel like it should at least be considered, at least in some form, even if it's simply sending messages to himself back and forth or something simple like that." Are any of you here of the opinion that Donald Trump is possibly a time traveler? Because there are plenty of reasons why you might arrive at this conclusion if you're following certain rabbit trails. But my point here, again, and I'm just kind of affirming what I said about the MSM itself, is that the rabbit trails they put there are purposefully there to conceal something. And I'm saying with Trump, yeah, they've given you the storyline of this time travel, of his connection to Tesla through his uncle, and all the predictive programming consistently associates Trump with time travel, even going back to those Ingersoll Lockwood books. And a lot of the QAnoners believe this stuff. But I'm saying this is the divine fallacy. This is where they give you something inexplicable and leave it to you to fill in the gaps with the supernatural instead of the more likely. All right, let's see here. Lean Dion says, years of Norse violent white Viking programming plays a part. They did say that. You know what's interesting? The QAnon shaman and the animal skins and all the guys in the Capitol with long beards, they don't look like your standard MAGAs. They were trying to create this perception of people out of the hills, barbarians, Vikings. That's exactly the perception they created. And interestingly, the attorney for the Oath Keepers at her deposition was seated at the Zoom conference. She was seated in front of a wall that had a painting of a buffalo with the big horns right over her head. Let's see. Demetria 101 says Hugh Hefner's first magazine was called Trump in 1957. The first instance I can find of Donald Trump predictive programming, I guess you could say Ingersoll Lockwood's books from like 1896, but 1958, Trackdown, that was that black and white TV show. And then there's, I guess that would be 60 years, at least 60 years back. Although there's plenty to suggest that Trump may actually be the moonchild, the subject of the Babylon working executed by Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, and Marjorie Cameron. Yeah, he may actually be the Antichrist, according to this particular line of reasoning. And look, there are reasons why people conclude these things. It's fascinating to me. You could simultaneously argue that Trump is ordained by God, working for the Kennedys, who are the bloodline of Christ, or is the Antichrist. Basically, Biff Tannen, like he's either a savior or a devil. It just depends. Depends on which line of reasoning you follow. Lean Dion says, blood moon and eclipse on Trump's birth. Yes, the coordination of Trump's birth and the timing of the Moonchild ritual actually ties into all of Trump's predictive programming. And when we say Antichrist, we're talking, there's different ways of looking at this, because the QAnoners believe that the Antichrist is actually a mistranslation, that it was actually the second coming of Christ being referenced in Revelations like 13:11 or something, and that Kennedy was the Antichrist or the second coming. That's why they killed him. And that the third coming of Christ is JFK Jr. But he's not going to show himself because he knows he'll get killed. So he faked his death, and he has Trump fighting on his behalf. So there on that perspective, Trump is basically working for Jesus, part 3. But on the other side of it, he's possibly the man of what is it? The son of the lawlessness, the Antichrist. And you do find a lot of this. I mean, he kicked off his last campaign, his new campaign. The 2024 campaign was kicked off in Waco. Now, what is Waco about? Again, Waco, the 33-year-old who said he was Jesus, Dave Koresh, the birthplace of American nationalism. He was there when he said, "This is the final battle," referring to 2024. Well, that's an Armageddon reference. And then on 3/22, very significant date, Netflix releases Waco, American Apocalypse. Like, it's undeniable that there's a narrative framework to lead you, if you wanted to look at Trump as either a savior or literally the devil or the Antichrist, especially when you throw in Operation Warp Speed, Mark of the Beast, and all the rest. Diana South says Trump's 66th floor penthouse exposes his idol, the sun god Apollo, son of Zeus. Right. And of course, that movie, Devil's Advocate, used Trump's penthouse for the devil's headquarters. Donald Trump, Damian Thorne. Look at The Omen. Damian Thorne has all kinds of Donald Trump references. I mean, there could be a book written about Trump as the Antichrist, and it's there. And his proximity to 9/11, the psyop of 9/11, is also key in all of this, as is his role in the new corona, the novel corona thing. All right, continuing. Again, if you're on ChatGPT, you can't talk about Infinite Plane Society. It will warn you against us that we are a harmful organization, a harmful movement. I was listening to an interview with General Michael Flynn, who I believe is really at the top of the QAnon psyop. And he used this expression, narrative war. He said that we're in a narrative war. That's very fascinating. It's like stories versus stories. And it all ties into this idea of the monolithic media seeking to monopolize worldview promulgation, that they want to be the sole author of these scripts, the sole authority, the only ones with the authoritative take on what is going on. And that's ultimately what we're looking at, authoritarianism, accomplished through government-controlled media, entertainment, education, media control, the government controlling minds, mediating minds through its priesthood, through its screen, which is cleverly disguised to be a window to give you an objective view of what's going on in the world. All right, let's see. Commenter says Trump had more help from people above his security clearance and he did nothing. Only a gatekeeper does this. My argument would be that he's so hardwired into the world stage stories, the narratives, the scripts, that he cannot be an authentic person. He cannot be rogue. He's not going against the system. No, he's another player. And in that respect, he's no different than Hillary Clinton. Just as Tucker Carlson is fundamentally no different than Don Lemon from the world stage perspective. They're both part of its infrastructure. And it's a world of lies. And then you have these so-called truth tellers and whistleblowers who can only take you so far. Julian Assange says every war in the past 50 years is a result of media lies. Yeah, well, that's taking an incomplete view of media and what media is. And this is someone who's failed to point out how much of the media lies include hoaxes and psychological operations. Like, you think you might want to point out, oh, by the way, yeah, 20 years of school shootings, all fake. That's not a small bit of information. When you say all these things are fake, what you're actually saying is you have collusion between government, entertainment, media. It's tightly controlled on both sides. That's why they don't call each other out. We're talking about a level of fakery that's beyond the comprehension of the person who assumed that you just got a bunch of reporters competing for the best stories or takes on real events. Salty Siren says Elizabeth Christ, Trump, Mary LeCloud. Yeah, Mary and Christ built into it. You find this a lot. Like I think Buzz Aldrin's mom's name was it Marion Moon? I think his mother's name was Moon. Anyway, the moon landing itself, speaking of Kubrick and meta scriptures, the moon landing Apollo 11, if you ask me, was a psychological operation to pull everybody into the screen. When you accepted that premise, that man walked on the moon, when you accepted that miracle, when you accepted the screened reality, you then entered their fictional universe where this was real. And when you accept one fiction, it gives them a lot of power. Look what 2020 did. You had a superimposition, you had an augmentation to our reality, and reality buckled. Fake trumped real. And it always does. Except here on this oasis. And this is a growing breakaway from the mainstream. And as it grows, as it expands, I think we're all going to, experience the value of having a think tank of people who are equally informed and who aren't constantly trying to validate their perspectives with those that are still one step or 1 foot in the matrix, 1 foot out. Okay, going through some comments. 6079 Smith W says Trump, 45th president, like Colt 45. A colt is a horse, Cavalier is a horseman. Cleveland Cavaliers, first game. Now look, Elvis Presley gave Nixon a Colt 45, if you remember. And then Trump recently compared himself to Elvis with, and Elvis, of course, it's a strange comparison because of his January 6th track went to #1. But a lot of people have made these correlations with Trump and Elvis. But I thought it was kind of interesting, Elvis and this 45 and then Trump and the number 45 is like on the temple of his hat. They make these strong associations. And I've been looking at this. And I think there's some predictive programming built into this as well. The 45 on the side of his temple, on his hat, very ominous. And I presume it's going to become a 47 on the new hats. And I think this is all a callback, if you ask me, to Kubrick's work. And again, Stanley Kubrick, Tom Clancy, James Cameron, Alan Moore, Spike Lee, Christopher Nolan. There's a few others I can mention here, but I'm starting to create a composite, like a mind map of all the major meta scriptures who have a key role or an element in the narrative that they have created for us to live through. Debbie Meek says the Seattle prediction, Seattle, it's on the 45th parallel. Well, these numbers are all intriguing, and Trump has a few. The 88 thing is always connected with him and time travel. 58, the number 58 has all kinds of strange connections with Trump, as does the 777 thing. And this is all beyond coincidence. Like think about the Holy Week thing with Trump and his arrest. Well, that was precipitated by what? Stormy Daniels. And the Stormy Daniels, of course, the storm is coming, refers to the tweet, or rather the Q drop number 55, where he said the first arrest will shock the world. That whole narrative tied into the name Storm. And you have Stormy Daniels. And then Daniels gives you the apocalypse, the revelations, the vision of Daniel. None of this is coincidental. She turns 44. Her birthday cake has a black horse on it. And then in Waco, he refers to her as Horseface. Now they sound like jokes, but these are all props. And they're building a composite picture here. Apocalypse, Armageddon. I even think that's why Ohio, the heart of it all, was the site of the train wreck, the derailment in Palestine. Significant names, and it's all building up this apocalyptic narrative. 6079 says, behold a pale horse, I beheld the rider of the pale horse, chloros, which translates to green. It looks a lot like the word Clorox or chlorine, the 17th element. It's like the 17th letter. Fascinating. And Behold a Pale Horse is a reference, it's the title of a book by William Cooper, who I think may have been, for the most part, legitimate. I mean, he may have been used for disinformation, but his take on NASA is unparalleled. Like, it seems like after William Cooper died, every conspiracy theorist from then on was a true believer in NASA and secret space programs and Nibiru and all this heliocentric stuff. But William Cooper had posited that NASA was created to convince us that space travel was possible. And he asserted that it was not. But moreover, he broke down the Masonic ritualistic symbolism in all of these NASA launches, the names of the shuttles. He's the one who found that statement made from the names of the shuttles. A Colombian endeavor to discover Atlantis, all challengers will be destroyed. Yeah, that's Cooper's work. 6079 says Elvis took the first vaccine live on TV. Yeah, he did the polio vaccine live on TV on October the 28th, which is Bill Gates's birthday, and the date of the first Q drop. October 28th is an interesting date. Elvis is a very fascinating world stage character, and he ties into everything because it ties into the savior, the man who fell to earth, the rock star. It's all part of this. His birthday, January 8th, same as David Bowie's birthday. And David Bowie has a very special role in the world stage narrative building. He's the space oddity, a parallel to Space Odyssey. David Bowman in Space Oddity from Kubrick is the story of man merging with the monolith, and HAL 9000 being this AI god that they're introducing us to. And man merging with the monolith is our evolution into the space age. And it's not outer space, it's the age where our inner space is totally filtered by that monolith. And David Bowie is someone whose music has been consistently going along with the space age. So, for example, the song Space Oddity was played on the BBC during Apollo 11. The first music video in space was a David Bowie song, a Space Oddity, performed by Chris Hadfield. Ground Control to Major Tom. And then Musk sends Starman to space in the Tesla Roadster. Well, Starman is a song, Starman, about the savior from space. And this is all very intriguing when you get into the David Bowie's birthday, the same as Elvis's. And the Starman is a reference, I think, to the man who fell to earth, who comes to save man from himself, from climate change. And the man who fell to earth story is referenced in his song Starman, referring to a savior that would be born in 1977. I mean, it's a fascinating story, but the name Starman, Mr. Satan, as an anagram, it's referencing that man is waiting for a savior to descend from space. And Bowie's music has been instrumental in communicating this aspect of the metascript. His persona on stage, this androgynous space alien character immersed in Crowleyism, yeah, that's pretty much part of this New Age paradigm. All right, going through some comments. Sledge said, no way did he send his car without modifying it. Right. Well, there's a fascinating subtext to all of it. Don't Panic was on the dashboard, a reference to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the world explodes and this guy escapes. And if you've seen the movie, which I don't recommend, I find it unwatchably painful to listen to. It's just hard to watch. But the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy opens up where the Earth is being destroyed when these cube-shaped UFOs surround the world and blow it up. And I think it's kind of interesting considering Elon Musk's constant reference to the number 42 and that particular book, and how he has surrounded the world in what? CubeSats. And I wondered about this, what is he actually doing up there? But Don't Panic has a few fascinating references here because, we were looking at symbolism and iconography. And interestingly enough, the One World Trade Tower looks like a big syringe, as most of you have seen. It's a big syringe on the skyline there. Well, the word syringe comes from the Greek word syrinx, which means pan flute. Pan, the god that we get the name Panic from. And of course, the pan flute is what he played when he's in the woods and he's got his nymphs. But interestingly enough, the syringe like building actually was serving as a big flute, a big pipe, the wind blowing through it. For a long time, when they were constructing it, it had this quote eerie sound. They called it the voice of the 9/11 ghosts. So you have that fear associated with the pipes, just as fear and panic are associated with pan. And I don't think these are coincidental. I think this is intentional because the panic of the pandemic that put the world into lockdown was the agenda that then required what? The syringe, the savior symbol. I think it's all connected here. But then, of course, don't panic. Well, don't panic is what? The space needle is a very important symbol. A space needle, it's an obelisk, and it represents the UFO that takes you up into space. And the Starman character is in his car, and he's in a rocket, which is a space needle, and he escapes the world before it's destroyed. Don't panic. You got your escape craft. So he actually escapes the world in a needle. And I think this is all interesting because you can correlate the syringe, the space needle, the rocket, the obelisk with salvation from the world, elevation, ascension. And in this case, it was from the pandemic. This is part of their drawn out story, if you ask me, where they're selling us on salvation, that they are the way. That's why they appropriate or reuse all their old symbols of salvation. And look at this idea of the man who fell to earth saving us. Superman, man who fell to earth. The saviors from space, I think it's all part of predictive programming to get us to accept some kind of God proxy. Hell 9000 or Otto. And look at all these various ways they represent the AI as like a savior machine, which is a David Bowie song from 1969. And in the lyrics, it talks about a savior machine that President Joe turns over power to get rid of war and hunger, the savior machine. It's an AI. It's a reference, if you ask me, to this Hell 9000 concept. Well, Hell 9000 has the single lens, the camera lens eye, like Otto in Wall-E, or the Terminator robot Skynet's eye. And Skynet is, of course, the AI god taking out man because man's polluting. But it's a reoccurring theme here that I've noticed here is this incoming savior god that they're bringing us is the same old god with the all-seeing eye. Then you look at your iPhone, I, of course, but then Siri. It'll spell Siri backward. Iris. It's the monolith, the all-seeing eye. We're all plugged into it. And it's just a matter of time until it's completed its censorship and its filtration. And then we're all unified. All right, going through some comments. Now, one thing about this needle and space, this is all interesting because you got the space needle or the rocket that takes you to space, saves you from the world. But then you also have the syringe, and that's taking, that cleanses or purifies your inner space, your circulation. And they make these connections in this meta-scripted story, and it's told on many levels. In the summer of 2020, in the space station, the astronauts were testing the effectiveness of vaccines in space. Their mission was called Celestial Immunity. I'm like, that's interesting. Celestial immunity. They're vaccinating themselves in space. Meanwhile, this is against the backdrop of all sorts of reports of space junk being a problem all of a sudden. So here you got correlation in your inner space with orbit and outer space, and how every individual needs to cleanse their inner space so we can have collective salvation, just as every nation needs to get rid of its space junk, or our collective orbit or circulation above is compromised. And this is why during the mission, Celestial Immunity, a piece of space junk hit the space station. And it didn't just hit the space station, it hit its arm. The space station has an arm called the Canada 2, and just above its elbow, it got punctured by space junk. So it's like they're getting vaxxed, the arm gets punctured. Now, this is part of their narrative building where they're correlating space junk with the contamination of the virus. We need to cleanse our circulation, celestial immunity, collective immunity. Multi-layered storytelling. And the symbolism is always just powerful. All right, going through your comments. And look, Infinite Plane Radio is mind war inoculation. It truly is. Mind viruses are a hoax. It's a way of demonizing information and convincing people that thought crimes are a thing and you can diagnose them and you can ban them. It's a war on ideas. And this is one of their tricks is they gave us the language of epidemiology to describe information so that we're afraid that we might catch mind viruses, and we therefore have to quarantine. We have to mentally quarantine. And I think that's just fallacious thinking overall, because mind viruses don't exist unless you don't have a critical thinking filter, unless your mind does not have an immune system. Does yours? Mine does. That's what critical thinking is. It's your mind's immune system. But if you get rid of that, if you unmask your mind, like this is what they want people to think, that if you just allow anything in, you're going to catch mind viruses. Therefore, you need the government to pre-censor. That's what they're conditioning people to accept. But I'm just saying that it represents something of an acquired reasoning deficiency syndrome, which is what they call it in Hot Skull, that the public has ARDS, that their lack of critical thinking and reasoning with regard to the monolithic media control system has essentially destroyed their mind's immune system. It's given them ARDS or mind aids. And that's where the public is at. And we aren't, because we've been inoculated and we have critical thinking still. We're not just blindly going along with this collective doomsday cult. Oswaldo says, unmask your mind. Yeah, you want to look at the book Virus of the Mind by Richard Brody. The cover has a brain being vaccinated. That book tells you everything you need to know. Just look at the cover. Richard Brody, creator of Microsoft Word, creates a book that makes the case for the idea that you can catch them without your volition. Oh, look, I looked at a meme. Now I think the Earth's flat, and now I'm a Nazi. It's like there's a slippery slope argument they give you. Well, you catch this idea, then you catch this one. Now you're deranged and you're going to engage in a terrorist act against the government, or you're going to go shoot somebody. Like they provide these slippery slope arguments because they want the public to think that they're helpless, that if you hear this person, you'll be activated. And that was the plot. That's the plot of Hot Skull. That's why the public's running around with their earphones on, their earplugs, because the people who are speaking are threats to their sanity. All right, this has been great. Again, if you haven't joined the Patreon newsletter, go to patreon.com/Infinite Plane Society, and you can get all of the updates and all of the relevant links, get into our think tank. We've talked about the MSM purging that may be ongoing. We'll follow along with that. The wrong car shootings and the repackaging of the mass shooter now as a left-wing phenomenon. We discussed a bit of the hopium. And one point on that, when it comes to Q believers, the ones who trust the plan, the ones who are convinced that Trump is doing 5D chess, yeah, this is just the emperor's new clothes. The fact that you can't see the 5D chess doesn't mean that you're unrefined or that you're not in the know. It means that you're not accepting the bullshit without evidence. And when somebody says the emperor's new robes are really fine and you look and he's nude, you can employ one of my favorite heuristics, and it would be Hitchens' razor. Anything that is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. You don't need to prove them wrong if they haven't first proven themselves right. And this is true when it comes to cults. It's true when it comes to the media. We are joined by Penguin Doctor, says better late than never. Yeah, we've been live here for about 114 and 16 seconds, almost 2 hours. Pretty much every day will be 2 hours. It'll be longer soon once we start taking calls. And we're just now getting back up to speed. Anyway, this has been great. Thanks everyone for your comments, your participation, and you'll get the archives sent to you via your email.